Hello and welcome to this webinar. Today I'll be talking about 5 common compliance mistakes, how to avoid them, and what the root causes can be within the organization. Hopefully this will be useful for you and your company. Hope everyone's doing well, staying home and staying safe. So here we will go to the next slide. There I am. So a quick introduction from myself. I'm a privacy and GDPR compliance specialist at PreDetect, with a primary focus on the UK market. So a regular day, you'll find me advising on issues related to data protection in the UK, things like PCR, DPA, and of course the big one in 2021, which is Brexit and the UK GDPR situation. I have a background in management consulting and legal advisory, which allows me to kind of take the business-driven approach and make privacy much more simple. So next we're going to take a quick look at the agenda, I believe, see what we're going to run through in the next kind of half an hour to an hour. Let's see. There we go. So firstly, we're going to take a look at a few root causes of some common compliance mistakes. Then we're going to go on to 5 common problems, a quick case study, some key takeaways, and finally some Q&A at the end if anyone has any questions. Throughout the webinar, you'll be able to type any questions in the GoToWebinar box, which should be popped up on your screen somewhere, and I'll be able to see those at the end. Also, the slides will be sent out as well as a recording if you have to drop out for some reason, so no worries on that. And yeah, so let's get into it. So we've got here causes of compliance mistakes. So the problems with effective compliance within a company are pretty wide, as you can imagine. But the 3 most common that I come across in organizations with some form of established data protection program are the 3 you see here. So firstly, there are focus issues. And so by this, I mean that there is some confusion whether the DPO or compliance manager should be focusing their energy within a company. Should it be a certain set of employees who touch the most sensitive data? Should it be a specific department like IT, or perhaps even a focus on one regulation? So the GDPR, which could then lead a company to ignore the privacy and electronic communication regulation, commonly known as PCR, for outbound marketing, for example. It's a tricky issue that involves a lot of internal organizational awareness in order to perfect. And that means organizing interdepartmental efforts to map these data flows and get a good handle on what you need to achieve and how to do that. So this kind of leads on to the second cause here, which is lack of communication. It's important to remind employees that everyone is a part of the compliance process, not just the team that deals with sensitive data the most, or a specific department. So the point I'm making here is that not only is communicating this information to employees important, but ensuring that the level of communication is maintained. A one-off audit will provide you with good information, but if you can get all departments and employees to keep data protection in the back of their mind, then your organization will be a much better place. So finally, and very much appropriately for 2021, obviously legal and regulatory landscape changes. Of course, when I say that, you're thinking of Brexit, 100%, but outside of that, we have decisions from the EU courts as well. So think the Schrems 2 rulings. And these things can have a real practical impact on how your organizations should approach their data protection. So with that in mind, and I really want you to keep those 3 things in mind, we're going to jump into these 5 mistakes. Let's see here. Okay, so number 5, firstly, we have a common failure, which is not realizing that compliance is an ongoing task. So this is one of the first things I usually remind clients when they come on board with PreDetect and we're looking into their specific compliance needs. As the quote here says on the right, achieving quote unquote compliance is a great achievement in and of itself, but really is only demonstrating that you can reach the base requirements at a certain point in time. So beyond this, you have to maintain the compliance with the aforementioned changes to regulatory landscape in mind, for example. As well as this, you have to consider how a business will naturally develop over time. The example we have here on the slide is forgetting to update a policy when a new tool is introduced, or not updating something when a new third-party provider or supplier is used. And that could impact a wide range of things. So think a new US provider for data storage, something like that, and then the ramifications that the recent Schrems 2 decision would have on that, to give you some idea. So to fix this sounds quite simple in practice, but I guarantee that enforcing this will be rather difficult, and that only multiplies by organization size. You'll want to regularly review your data protection measures and internal processes, and of course update them when necessary. So like I said, this does sound quite simple, but achieving that cross-departmental cohesion is not as easy as it sounds by a long shot. You've got to ensure communication is high and people are well aware of their data protection obligations in order to guarantee this internal compliance. A kind of practical tip here would be to conduct maybe bi-yearly internal kind of mini audits. So you have to be careful not to overdo the compliance requirements, as I'm sure many of you will have met some resistance in the past. But getting people on the same page is extremely important, and a small internal audit that won't have external ramifications, but what it will do is it will highlight any issues, and it will ensure employees are aware of what a real audit could involve. So now we're going to go on to number 4. What have we got? Number 4 is what we've got here is a more niche mistake, but definitely something that the consultants at PreDetect see pretty frequently. It's important to note here that every company should have a solid IT security policy in place, and then this policy may include information relating to data protection. But that doesn't mean that it's a replacement. So the IT department's usually the target of these mistakes. It's not limited to the IT department, but usually that's what you'll find. Because with them having a lot of compliance matters to consider from a data security standpoint, they might involve things like ISO certification compliance and other technical measures, all the way to just standard GDPR implementation. But with this being said, data protection does require a notable effort from all employees that may deal with sensitive data, not just the IT department. Cybersecurity covers safety against cyber attacks, while data protection covers everything from storage to management, access control, data process, etc. So to deal with this, a compliance manager should be implemented that not only a compliance program, should be implemented that not only covers data security but also privacy. Of course, having the IT department involved in the creation of this program would be great, but also other departments will be required for tasks like data mapping and figuring out where sensitive data is dealt with, who has access to it. So consider the following scenario where it could be marketing, where marketing make outbound calls for a health service. The marketing department will clearly have access to some information that could be classified as sensitive. They'll have to adhere to the PECR as well. So to simply focus on the IT department and pure data security would be a huge oversight in that example. So I think it's quite easy to fall into this trap as the DPO or compliance manager, because you begin the long task, usually the quite long task, of evaluating the security and IT side of compliance. But once you get into that, you can lose focus of the bigger picture. So you've got to make sure you don't get swamped and overwhelmed by one department. And again, like I said, we've put IT here as a kind of example, but this, depending on the organization, depending on the business, this could very easily be a different department that takes up all of the focus. So now we're going to go on to number 3, which is probably the point I personally find the most interesting on this list, and that's to focus too much on the process of data protection itself, because by doing this, you miss out on potential organizational benefits. So consider this: you create a solid compliance program for your organization, and people appear to be following it, which is great. Now you have to look beyond that. how can you optimize the processes that you've gathered in your registry of processing activities? What benefit and value can you bring to the various departments with the information you have? And remember, at this point, with the program in place, you are likely one of the people in the organization that has one of the most holistic understandings of the business. You should be using that to your advantage. So you could optimize a process, cut out a middleman, increase output. All of these things can be done by reviewing the program, and businesses with a pragmatic mindset, and you can potentially save the company a lot of time, a lot of money. Beyond this, you can look at the company culture when you implement a policy. It does not have to be another time sink for the employees if you appropriately introduce privacy by design. Now, I'm sure you've heard the term, but this method of introducing compliance as part of the company culture provides a massive benefit for the organization in terms of data protection, as well as benefiting the employees by making them think about potential compliance issues in their day-to-day work lives. So not only will this benefit you as the compliance manager or DPO, it will, in the long run, benefit the organization as well by providing the individual employee with a great mindset for approaching their work with, the data protection on their mind. So to implement and fix this is not overly simple. The basic advice would be to apply operational and regulatory requirements with a strict focus on your business context. So what is the organization trying to achieve? What is the best way to do that whilst also maintaining compliance? And with this in mind, you can easily optimize and improve beyond just introducing the odd policy. So to do this, beginning the process of creating a compliance program with privacy by design in mind will help you a lot down the road. So finally, I would say as a compliance manager or DPO, you need to be extremely approachable. A lot of what I have talked about on this slide sounds great in theory, but to get it to happen in practice requires strong levels of communication between departments, which simply won't be possible if people do not really want to talk to the point of contact or see it as a kind of extra in their day. I would say fostering that kind of internal culture is extremely important, and that starts with the person who wants to develop it, being you, the DPO or compliance manager. This one is a bit more of an organizational culture approach, kind of mixed in with data protection. But I think if we want to achieve the things that not only the GDPR wants to achieve, but any of the big data protection regulations, if we want to achieve that, we've really got to think forward on how we can implement that in the day-to-day running of a business. So it's not just something to put off till the end of the month and then take a look at, or whatever the case may be. So the next one we've got is undervaluing the importance of involving employees. I think you're probably seeing a trend here at this point. We're really going for an organizational approach to data protection. So this is a classic mistake we've got here. Not all companies ensure that employees are aware of their obligations under the various regulations, and the kind of, I would say, traditional or perhaps old method of sending out an employee handbook packed with a bunch of different policies is generally not the way to go about this. The reason this is unfortunately still relevant is that many of the incidents and penalties, so primarily fines, come from non-compliance with the regulations that could easily have been solved. And how do you solve that? As you can see on the slide, training would be my answer. So to fix this, there's a clear solution, and that's educating employees. Remember that while you may have a good understanding of the legal requirements, and maybe we can go as far as to say that marketing may know some of the rules, and IT may know some of the requirements as part of their job, but to assume that the different departments know specifics of data protection is, again, a bit of an oversight. Now, I'm not saying that handing out policies is a bad decision. There's plenty of people, plenty of employees who will review, internalize that information, and implement it in their day-to-day work lives. But that may not be everyone. And to guarantee that this information is understood, training is the best solution. This may be like PreDetect's own external training, where we offer online learning with videos, presentations, and quick tests, or it could mean internal workshops from the compliance manager, DPO, with various departments. So say you do a kind of workshop on data protection with a specific department, really focusing on what they would need to know, what they would really need to understand. But whichever way you approach it, education is definitely a key part of any data protection program that feeds directly into the privacy by design, which was mentioned earlier. This is very simple, but also it's very important. So next we have number one. And the last one here, again, is a rather specific one. So what I tried to do with this was go for a few broad mistakes and concerns and a few more detailed ones. This is something we've had a lot of questions about, from large companies with DPOs all the way to small companies who don't really have a designated data protection representative, but may assume that now the UK is no longer part of Europe, that the GDPR does not apply. So unfortunately, that's obviously not the case, as the UK is looking to uphold the same high standards that the European Union brings with GDPR in order to achieve their adequacy decision. I won't go into this too much as it's a bit off topic, but clearly a positive decision for Britain would benefit a lot of businesses in the same way that the old Privacy Shield benefited the US prior to the Schrems II judgment. As to whether I personally think the decision will be reached, it's quite uncertain. The IPA Investigatory Powers Act 2016 is, of course, a big problem, as in a lot of ways it replicates the FISA 702 law over in the States. We'll have to wait and see on this. But for the DPOs and compliance managers, fortunately, the European Union did agree to a 4 to 6 month bridge, which temporarily allows the transfer of data. And while this is good, it has also led to some confusion regarding the EU representative. The appointment of a representative appears to be irrespective of an adequacy decision, however. So therefore, that means whether or not the European Commission arrive at the positive decision in relation to the UK during the 4 to 6 month grace period, it doesn't affect the need to appoint a UK if you're a European company, or EU representative if you're a British company. So whilst the ICO did not confirm this specifically, largely I suspect because adequacy is not a factor in the decision, information on the ICO website does appear to indicate that this is the case. So this means what you need to do, you need to find an EU rep. Fortunately, there are plenty of services that offer this, such as PreDetect's own, and it does not involve a huge amount of effort from the organizations in order to set up. So it's definitely one of those things that is very important to do. It's not extremely difficult, but it really makes sure you're covered on all sides during the Brexit time. So really great there that it wasn't made overly burdensome, which is nice. So now I think we're going to go on to a case study. Yep. So here we've got a big case study coming out of the UK, which was Ticketmaster. I'm sure you're familiar with the company. They provide ticket sales, ticket distribution, etc. So they were fined £1.25 million, $1.6 million by the ICO for failing to keep their customers' personal data secure. The ICO found that the ticket sales and distribution company did not place appropriate security measures for the prevention of certain data security aspects on a chatbot that was installed on their online payment page. So this amounted to a breach in GDPR. The chatbot itself was hosted by a third party. I believe it was called Inventor Technologies, I believe is the name. And that was on Ticketmaster's online payment portal. And it enabled attackers to access financial details, things like that. So what do we see here? A few of the points I've mentioned come up in this case. So a clear lack of communication between the data protection, IT, and marketing departments, and also a lack of involvement for employees. So with a privacy by design approach, it's extremely unlikely that this would have occurred at all, 100%. This really provides a practical angle for some of the mistakes from earlier that appeared quite trivial or maybe even simple, easy to avoid. They do impact all kinds of companies, and they're not limited to just small ones. As you can tell, Ticketmaster's really quite big. Your first assumption would be that this would not happen. Normally, there must have been a huge, huge mistake, but clearly that's not the case at all. You can see here, Ticketmaster, if Ticketmaster can do it, many other companies could do it. And it does seem to have resulted from a lack of communication between marketing, IT. I'm sure marketing would have said, okay, we need this implemented. And IT said, yes, no problem, it's done. Without going back and forth with the data protection, maybe the DPO, maybe a compliance manager or department, based on the size of the company, perhaps a department. It seems like there was that lack of essential communication there. And if privacy by design was on everyone's minds, very unlikely this would have happened. So now we're going to go on to, too far, the key takeaways. Here we have the key takeaways. So there's a lot that could have been included in this webinar, but we didn't want 20 common mistakes, or you get the idea. But to avoid rehashing the same information, here are the 5 things I would want you to take away from this session. So 1, to ensure compliance, really make it a company-wide task. And 2, that employees are educated. Just these 2 alone, I would say, will get you a long way. And also as a DPO or compliance manager, it will make your job a lot easier. So then in terms of things to remember data protection is not a one-off exercise. It's ongoing. And 4, DPOs and compliance managers can provide a lot of value outside of simple policy creation, as I mentioned. And then 5, communication is key. Of course, 100%. I think it would be hard to disagree with that at this point. So now the bulk of this has been done, I'm going to run through the PreDetect offering. And then I think, let me just check. Yeah, there's a couple of questions that have come through. So I will run through the offering and then run through the questions. Feel free to shoot any more while I'm going through this. Okay, so the PreDetect platform is a software as a solution for all of your data protection needs, and it allows you to do things such as identify risks, act when needed, and provide monitors and alerts for when you need to be doing things for your data protection program. It's great for DPOs, compliance managers, etc., but can also be used. It's nice and simple to use. So it's also been created for regular B2B clients. Outside of the platform, PreDetect offer an external DPO service and also EU representation. So this comes from the expert team of DPOs at PreDetect that help you to implement the regulatory compliance framework that I've been talking about throughout this webinar. And that can involve things like monitoring regulatory compliance, personalized advice for companies, so specialist advisory, and helping to implement a system of good practices within your organization and managing processes, data subject right access rights, management, and security breaches, a real holistic approach to your company's data protection. And then on this slide, we've got just a kind of list of different things that are available within the platform, just to give you some kind of idea. I won't run through them all here. You can take a quick look, but we've got things all the way from conducting risk assessments, DPIAs, impact assessments, gap analysis, processing activities, data mapping, and then onto kind of more external services as well, such as the DPO service, EU representation I mentioned, and document automation, etc., etc. So If you would like to try that out yourself, then you can contact us for a free demo, and we can help you identify risks, take appropriate measures, things like that. So now I think we will get on to some questions. And if you have more questions come up after, then feel free to shoot me an email there. We've got my email, and I will get back to you quickly. So the first question is, we're planning to expand physically to Europe in a couple of months, but currently do not have an office there. Do we need an EU representative now, or can we wait? So that's obviously a difficult situation that you're in. I can see why that would be there would be a question there for sure. But I would highly recommend you get one until you have an office in the country. Sure. We can't know how practical it is that the ICO or European authority will be checking, but for the relatively small cost, my recommendation 100% would be to get one that's in line with the ICO's recommendation. And for a relatively small cost, you'll ensure your own compliance. Good question, thank you. So the next one is, how can I get departments involved? Okay, yeah. So with this advice, obviously this is one of the main questions that people will ask. How do I actually get people involved? And a compliance manager or a DPO should act as a resource for the employees. And in turn, as they do that, they can form relationships with the people or the functions of a company that you need to support. You support the different compliance policies and guidelines. You have those relationships with the people or different functions, different departments, whatever the case may be. So, for example, that could be data protection training and implementation. And this kind of resource and relationship sounds rather theoretical, but the best way is to communicate and get people to understand what you're trying to achieve and why. And once someone understands what you're trying to achieve and why, they'll be more likely to go along with the changes, 100%. So that would be my advice there. And do we have any more questions? Apologies for this, it's quite hard to read the questions on the small thing. No, it doesn't look like we do. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining. This was a rather short and sweet one, which for the topic I think is quite appropriate. If you have any more in-depth questions, then feel free to shoot me an email. You will be also receiving a recorded copy, and I believe also the slides of this presentation to your email in the next day or so, I would assume, a couple of days perhaps. So yeah, thank you everyone for coming, and everyone stay safe, and yeah, thank you.